It is like the wild, wild west out there on the relief market at the trade deadline every season. Pretty much anyone could be available, and no one quite knows what the right price will be for a relief pitcher. But the Orioles are looking for bullpen help. So today, my wish list of controllable relievers at the deadline coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Tuesday, July 23rd, 2024, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb, and coming up on today's episode, I'm going to give you my wish list for Orioles relievers that they could go after at the trade deadline, specifically the controllable relievers, guys who are not going to become free agents after this year, who are at least signed through the 2025 season. I'll give you my wish list of my top six. There's some names you'll know and some names kind of coming out of left field that you may not, that could really help the O's. And then a couple of notes on the Orioles and the MLB draft coming up at the end of the show. But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.yeah. The right stay can make you a fan of any city, even your rivals. Check out Booking.com for your stay today. So it's my controllable relievers wish list that kind of ends my series of the pitching wish lists leading up to this year's deadline. We are only a week away. Next Tuesday, July 30th at 6 p.m. Eastern time is the trade deadline. The Orioles, I would think at this point, are hunting for at least one starter and one reliever to add to their team and are trying to upgrade at least from what they did last year, which was Jack Flaherty and Shintaro Fujinami, and that didn't quite work out for the O's at that time. But I've talked about controllable starters and rental starters on the podcast last week. A couple of weeks ago, I talked about rental relievers. Today, my top six controllable relievers. And now I've done these lists and, there's been guys who have been consensus number ones. And that's kind of going to be the case today. I think you probably know who's going to be number one on this list. But once you get further and further down, even with just a top six of a wish list I'm doing today, here's the funny thing about controllable relievers and just trading relievers in general. When there is a team that is at least not a solid playoff team and they're either wavering or they're definitely selling, the number one place to look and be like, all right, these are guys they are definitely trading, is rental relievers. Relievers are so fickle. Guys who are going to be free agents anyway. Generally, they're veterans. Those guys are getting dealt. They're not going to cost too much. But when it comes to relievers with team control, guys who are at least not free agents till after next season or even later, you just never know, because if you are a rebuilding team and you have a reliever that is, say, not a free agent until after 2027, you might think, oh, we might be good by then. But relievers, they go through such waves. Sometimes they're great for a year, terrible for a year, okay, good for 2 years, bad for 1 year. You kind of just never know, no matter how good their stuff is. And it's always good to capitalize on a reliever's value. Now, sometimes, depending on the situation you're in, that can hurt the clubhouse, and we've seen that with multiple different teams. But if you are truly selling, just trade away your relievers. A lot of people see it that way and maximize their value. And that is why putting together a list of controllable relievers that could be available is almost impossible, because in theory, any relief pitcher on a team that is clearly selling could be available, but they're not all going to get traded. In fact, there's not going to be teams that trade many more than maybe 3 of the 8 guys in their bullpen. That's a lot of guys to deal away. So it's much harder to condense this list. So because of that, yeah, you're going to know a couple of these names, but there's going to be some guys I really brought in from left field, maybe from out in the bullpen, that if the O's wanted to get creative, could really help this team. So we'll go from 6 to 1, again, controllable relievers here, and we will begin this one with number 6 on my list. Now, there is a chance that number 6 on this list is someone that you maybe have never heard about. And it is right-handed pitcher Calvin Fauché from the Miami Marlins, the team that the Orioles will be seeing tonight to start a 3-game series. So the first question is, okay, who in the world is Calvin Fauché? Well, first of all, he is a right-hander who actually pitched for the Rays for the last 2 seasons and then was in a 40-man roster crunch. We see it every year with Tampa Bay. They always have way too many guys that are eligible for the Rule 5 draft. They don't have enough spots on their 40-man roster. So in November every year, the Rays make a number of seemingly minor trades, just kind of get some guys off their 40-man roster. And Fauché was one of those guys this offseason. They dealt him to the Marlins along with Vidal Brujan in one of those 40-man crunch trades. So yes, he's been traded recently, but it's a weird deal. It's kind of hard to assess the return that the Rays got and compare it to what it could be now. Now, he doesn't really jump off the page as a tradable reliever because he's not a free agent until after 2029. That is a whole lot of team control. So you might be thinking, okay, the Marlins are pretty bad right now, but you got to think they'll want to be good by, 2027, 2028. And Calvin Fauché, if he's good now, they could hope he's good then. And while, yeah, that's a one way to look at it, the other way is, hey, Fauché's got good stuff. He's having a pretty solid season. This could be the time to deal him. Now, probably the number one reason he has even made this list is because of the pure stuff that comes out of that right arm of Calvin Fauché. His Stuff Plus, which is a model initially introduced by Eno Saris, which doesn't take into account your command. It's just the velocity and the movement of what you throw and how good it is. Generally, 100 is around league average. His 148 Stuff Plus is the second best Stuff Plus of any of the list of available relievers that I put together. And that was a large list of over 50 pitchers. Fauché was number 2 behind a guy you may have heard of named Mason Miller. That is the only guy above Fauché on this list, which is pretty incredible for that stuff. And it's all led by the cutter. A 195 Stuff Plus on Fauché's cutter makes it the best cutter in baseball. And it's also his most used pitch at 38% of the time. He's got a good sinker. His slider and curveball also have good Stuff Plus. Now, his curve's been kind of getting killed, but his sweeper's been pretty good when he throws it. And it's really been this cutter-sinker combination to get outs. He has yet to allow a home run all season. A lot of that's because the stuff is really good. Now, it's not the most jump-off-the-page numbers of all time. In 34 2/3 innings out of the Marlins bullpen, Fauché has a 3.38 ERA, but a 2.82 FIP. 23% strikeout rate is pretty good. 12% walk rate is definitely too high, but it's a fairly low hard hit rate and barrel rate as well for the right-hander. But you might say, okay, Connor, why would the Orioles want to go after a middle reliever in the Marlins bullpen? Because that's what he is. He is not any kind of 8th or 9th inning guy for Miami. Well, if the Orioles get a guy with stuff that good onto this team, they could truly make something of him. And again, he's got a whole lot of team control. So if you go get him, yeah, maybe he is just like a solid 6th inning guy down the stretch. He would still upgrade the Orioles bullpen right now. But imagine what the O's could do with him over the next couple of years with all that team control, making him better and better with that stuff he has. And you kind of look at what he can throw up there. And if you have a cutter that is that good, one pitch that's that good, it's hard to overlook it. Here is a chart right here. If you're watching on the Locked On Orioles YouTube page, cutter Stuff Plus in Major League Baseball. Calvin Fauché at 195 is the leader. The second best, Andrew Kittredge of the St. Louis Cardinals, is down at 171. Corbin Burns, 11th on this list. You've got Drew Smith and Emmanuel Clase of the Guardians, Jose Leclerc, the kind of postseason hero last year. Kenley Jansen's on this list. David Robertson, a guy the Orioles should go after. But nobody's got a cutter, purely stuff-wise, that is as good as Calvin Fauché. Now, again, it's not the most dominant numbers, and this is kind of more of a project, and he is already 28 years old, so it's not like he's super young. But if the O's want to think outside the box, maybe go somewhere that no one else is looking for relief help, and a guy that could help them for years to come, that they could develop into an even better pitcher, Calvin Fauché could be that guy. Number 5 on my list is someone a little more established, and someone that, despite the fact that I don't really believe many of his reports, was linked to the Orioles earlier this week. And that is right-handed pitcher Nick Martinez from the Cincinnati Reds. Now, Martinez signed a free agent contract with the Reds. I believe it was this or last offseason. Either way, he does have an option for 2025. Now, the reason he is not in the rental category is that it is a player option. That means at the end of the year, he gets to decide whether or not he would come back with his team for another year or hit free agency. So you can't really look at him as a rental when it's not the team's decision. For Nick Martinez, it is a $12 million player option that he has for 2025. Now, John Morosi, who's been wrong many times in the past, did report that the Reds are willing to trade players on short-term deals. He mentioned Frankie Montas and Nick Martinez, and specifically mentioned that the Orioles were interested. And I got to be honest, I am interested in Nick Martinez too. Now, in terms of what he throws up there, he's a pretty versatile reliever, which I think could really, really help the Orioles. And the other great thing is he could start some games for you. Martinez has thrown 72 innings this year, and that's because, along with a lot of relief appearances, he's also started 5 games for the Reds. He could be kind of a starting pitching option on the cheap. Now, he rarely goes more than 5 innings when he does start, but if you get him to be kind of an in and out number 5 starter / good multi-inning reliever, and you have him for next year, that could really help this team that's looking for both a starter and a reliever. And maybe you get Martinez at a reliever price, but he can help you as a starter, not just this year, but next year when you really need starting pitching. I mean, at worst, he'd be a great Cole Irvin replacement at this point on this team. Now, the stats for the right-hander Martinez in those 72 innings, he has a 3.88 ERA, but again, a 3.15 FIP, telling you, he should be a little bit better. 19% strikeout rate is not anything elite, but just a 3% walk rate is the second lowest of any reliever on my list of available guys. You add a 3% walk rate with a 29% hard hit rate, he throws strikes, and when guys swing at his strikes, they do not hit him hard, which is a fantastic combination to have, despite him not being like a super high leverage reliever. Again, if you are watching on the Locked On Orioles YouTube page, pulling up this chart from Baseball Savant, it is the Savant page for Nick Martinez, and you can see guys don't hit him hard. You can look at the hard hit rate, the average exit velocity. They're some of the best in the league, the barrel rate as well, and also the chase rate at 37%, top 10 in Major League Baseball in chase rate. So not only is he barely throwing balls, but when he does throw the ball out of the strike zone, the reason why he doesn't walk anyone is that his stuff is so good at times that guys consistently chase it out of the zone, swings and misses sometimes, but more so, it's just a lot of soft ground balls that turn into outs. And while strikeouts are the number one thing you want, soft contact is fantastic as well. He kind of throws the kitchen sink up there, does Martinez, 6 different pitches, all of them between 8% and 22% usage. So he mixes through all of those pitches. But the changeup is his best pitch, gets a lot of soft grounders, lots of swings and misses, 38% whiff rate, just a 168 expected batting average against that changeup. The curve and the slider, it's, pretty good whiff rates on those as well. And that hard hit rate, 8th lowest in Major League Baseball. What Martinez would be for the Orioles, he would come in, be some sort of swing man. 12 of his 23 relief outings this year have been of 2 or more innings. So he can definitely give you length out of the pen. He can start for you if you need. I don't think he would be that expensive either. The Reds just got swept by the Nats over the weekend, are certainly trending towards selling. Martinez would be a super interesting pickup for the Orioles. Number 4 on this list, I would say one of the names I am most confident that people are familiar with, and that is Chicago White Sox closer and right-hander Michael Kopech, who is not a free agent until after the 2025 season, so the Orioles would have about a year and a half of Kopech. Now, among the guys that I feel are like 80 to 90% sure that they are going to get traded. The White Sox are terrible. Kopech, they don't need a good closer. He's only got a year and a half left. He's having a good season. I feel like they're going to trade him. Among the guys that I'm super confident is going to be traded, among the relievers, he has the highest strikeout rate, and that is certainly a good place to start. Kopech, in 41 innings, has only 9 saves. A lot of that's because the White Sox, if you haven't noticed, don't win many baseball games, don't get in many save chances. 41 innings. Yes, he has a 5.05 ERA, but it's a 3.93 xFIP and a 3.95 expected ERA. He should be performing better than he is. A 31% strikeout rate is elite. A 13% walk rate is a little bit concerning and probably the biggest reason why he's not higher than number 4 on this list. But he doesn't get hit super, super hard, but he is kind of prone to the home run ball. And that can be an issue for a guy like Michael Kopech, who is throwing so many fastballs. Now, it's a fastball at 99 miles an hour. He throws it almost 80% of the time. He is heavy fastball, has great kind of ride on that fastball, the ability to make it look like it's going up instead of going down. Number 2 stuff plus in baseball on his 4-seam fastball. But the barrel rate of 13%, the walk rate of 13%, like those are a little bit concerning, and he has a home run problem. 20% home run to fly ball rate. He's basically every 5 fly balls, one of them is turning into a homer. That's pretty bad. That also means he's getting some bad luck too. He gets into a more pitcher-friendly park like Camden Yards, especially in left field. That should go down. Now, you can take this any way you want, but the way Kopech is looking, and just last week he threw the first, I believe, ever immaculate inning by a White Sox pitcher. You can take this any way you want, but the heavy reliance on the fastball and the stuff and the way he conducts himself on the mound and what kind of happens to him when he struggles with the walks and the homers, he kind of reminds me of Craig Kimbrell. And you can be excited like that because Kimbrell's a Hall of Famer and has been good at times this year. You can be worried by that because he's had some blowouts that have been tough to watch as well on the mound for the Orioles. But he looks like a younger Craig Kimbrell. And that is what I think the Orioles could turn Kopech into, the all-star version of Craig Kimbrell from a few years back, because you take him out of the White Sox pitching development, which is a disaster, and put him into the Orioles pitching development apparatus. Kopech with that fastball and the breaking balls, which are good too. I think the Orioles could unlock something further with him, and you'd have him for another year as well on the cheap. I know he's had injury issues, but man, that stuff is enticing. But that is 6 through 4 on my list. Next up, we move into the top 3, the guys who could make a huge impact on this Orioles bullpen. Could be a little costlier, but might be worth it for the O's at the deadline. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.yeah. With summer travel heating up, especially travel for baseball games, it's time to explore those U.S. cities you always secretly wanted to learn more about. Yeah, we're talking about your rival cities. With hotels, bed and breakfast, vacation rentals, resorts, and so much more on Booking.com, you might just find your perfect stay, even in your baseball rival city. Now, I don't know if the Orioles and Marlins are really rivals, but it's certainly a team the Orioles want to beat up on. And you know what? You can feel your own way about Marlins Park. I've been there. It's certainly an experience and certainly a vibe they've got going on there. But what a great trip it would be to make it to Miami this week and see the O's play some baseball. And Booking.com has so many choices across the U.S. for your summer travel this MLB season. The right stay can make you a fan of any U.S. city, even your rivals. Book today on Booking.com on the site or in the Booking.com app. And today's episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by FanDuel. Now, I love when sports are going on. I love when plenty of sports are going on. But in the summer, sometimes there is a little bit of a lull. But don't worry, we still have Major League Baseball every day. And you've still got FanDuel every day as well when you're in that sports mood. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone, every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer at FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. So we are now into the top 3 of my controllable reliever wish list for the Orioles at this year's trade deadline. Number 6 was the right-hander Calvin Fauché out of Miami. Number 5, the right-hander Nick Martinez from the Reds. And number 4, the right-handed fireballer Michael Kopech from the White Sox. Number 3 on my list is another closer on a bad team, and that is the right-hander Kyle Finnegan from the Washington Nationals. He has been the closer for DC this year and is also a free agent after 2025. Now, I still think the Nats are selling, and they've already started their sell because they traded away Hunter Harvey, their setup man and former Oriole, who was also controlled through 2025, to the Royals for a couple of prospects last week. Now, the Nats did sweep the Reds over the weekend, and maybe you're playing a little bit better baseball, but I think everyone knows they're going to trade Kyle Finnegan. Now, he's got the closer experience. That's the good start here. He's got 28 saves already this year. That's more than Craig Kimbrell. He could certainly fill in for that role or even take over that role from Kimbrell if the Orioles would need him to. Now, on the flip side, I've mentioned at times how, hey, and I talked about this when the Orioles signed Kimbrell. Generally, Kimbrell will get the job done, but it's going to be tough to watch at times. Finnegan kind of falls into that category because he is the Major League Baseball leader in pitch clock timer violations. He's got 9 of them this year. Remember, if you violate the pitch clock, you let it run down too long, immediate ball onto the count. Nobody else has more than 7. And earlier this season in Colorado, he was the pitcher on our first ever pitch timer violation walk-off when he had a 3-2 count with the bases loaded in a tie game bottom 9, and he waited too long, violated the pitch count, or the pitch timer, and it was ball 4 and a walk-off. So yeah, That seems to happen. That's a little concerning. And he does have the fifth highest hard hit rate against him in all of Major League Baseball. Quite frankly, that's a little concerning as well at 49%. But in 42 and 2/3 innings this year is a 2.32 ERA with a 3.40 xFIP, 26% strikeout rate, pretty good. 8% walk rate is pretty low. 7% barrel rate, you can work with that. Has a pretty solid ground ball rate of 41%. Like, it's all the things you want. Now, he doesn't have any of these like crazy elite pitches or crazy elite stats, but everything comes together to work. It's heavy four-seam fastball usage. His four-seam fastball is his best pitch, runs it up there pretty high velocity, and has a splitter and a slider to go with it. And all of them, opponents are hitting under 200 against all three pitches, and the expected stats are better on all three of those pitches as well. And really, he's been elite against left-handed hitters, which is huge for a right-handed reliever. Lefties are hitting just 134 against Finnegan this year. And some of that is because of the splitter. He has that weapon against lefties. Some is just because his fastball is so good. But he also has this slider, and that's more to get righties out. Now, he doesn't throw it a lot, but it has a 43% swing and miss rate. And I bet the Orioles would have him throw it a little bit more. He does have a bit of a home run problem, but Oriole Park would help, just like it could help for Michael Kopech, especially out to left field. And I just think for Finnegan, like, his ceiling is not as high as Kopech. Like, at their best, Michael Kopech is better than Kyle Finnegan. I was really comparing these two guys. I was flip-flopping who would be 3, who would be 4. But here's the thing. There's always the chance that the Orioles need someone to take over the 9th inning if Craig Kimbrell struggles late in the year. And while Kopech has done it this year, he's barely been in those spots. 9 saves. The White Sox are terrible. The Nats aren't good either, but when they win, it's generally a close game. And again, Finnegan has 28 saves because of that, because he's been in so many of those high leverage spots and he's been so good in them this year. I think the coin flip would go to Finnegan to put him at number 3, and that stuff is still really, really good. And again, you get him as an option in 2025 as well. Now, number 2 on my list is someone I've talked about before. When I broke down kind of the NL Central trade candidates, I talked about this guy from the Cubs, especially when Chicago came into Baltimore last week. And you're going to say, Connor, how are you putting this guy above the stuff of Kyle Finnegan and Michael Kopech and plenty of other relievers out there? But I'm going to convince you right now why right-handed pitcher Mark Leiter Jr. from the Chicago Cubs, who is not a free agent until after 2026, is the number 2 pitcher on my controllable reliever wish list for the deadline this year. First of all, you're going to get mad because what in the world is going on with that ERA? You're going to say, Connor, a 4.64 ERA in 33 innings? Why do you want this guy? Well, it's a FIP of 237. It's an xFIP of 261, tells you he should be better. It's a 33.1% strikeout rate. That's pretty dang good. It's a 9% walk rate. Nothing wrong with that. It's only a 32% hard hit rate. It's a 51% ground ball rate. Among all of the relief pitchers, the list I put together of relievers, controllable relievers who are available, there's almost 30 of them on my list. Mark Leiter Jr. is 2nd in xFIP, 2nd in FIP, 2nd in strikeout percentage, 7th lowest hard hit rate, 4th in ground ball percentage. That is all an amazing combination. And how does he do it? Quite possibly one of the best splitters in Major League Baseball. The splitter that Mark Leiter Jr. throws has a 62% swing and miss rate. Let's look at his Baseball Savant page right here. I got it up on the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel. Look at that off-speed run value, some of the best in baseball. Look at the expected ERA. Look, average exit velocity, 86 miles an hour, doesn't get hit hard. Hard hit rate is good. Ground ball rate is good. Strikeout rate is great. Swing and miss rate, the chase rate, it's all fantastic on his page. And you add it to a splitter that, again, that swing and miss rate is absurd at 62%. Now, you're an Orioles fan. You're thinking of an elite reliever with a great splitter. You're thinking of Felix Bautista, and you're thinking, Connor, there's no way anyone had a better swing and miss rate on a splitter than Felix Bautista. That pitch was disgusting. Felix Bautista's swing and miss rate last year on his splitter, 61%. Mark Leiter Jr. this year, 62%. Now, Leiter doesn't throw 102, so he's not Felix Bautista, and I never said he was, but Leiter adds a really good sinker and a good curveball to lefties that gets a lot of swing and miss, a good sweeper to righties that gets a lot of swing and miss. I think Mark Leiter Jr. is the most underrated reliever in all of Major League Baseball. The Cubs just lost another series to the Diamondbacks over the weekend. They are in last place in the NL Central. They're still only like 3 or 4 games out of the wild card, but it's so jumbled up in there. The Cubs should consider selling. And if they do, the Orioles should jump on Mark Leiter. Not only do you get this amazing stuff, but you get him for 2 more seasons on the cheap after this year. I'm going to put my neck out and say Mark Leiter Jr., if traded, would be the steal of the trade deadline and could turn into maybe the best setup man in baseball come postseason time. You're saying, Connor, Mark Leiter Jr.? Yes, Mark Leiter Jr. Mark my words on that one. Now, who is number one? Number one's easy. I'm going to throw up the Baseball Savant page here on the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel, and I'm going to let you all a second to guess who this is. Who has that much red in the 100 percentile in pretty much every stat? Yes, of course that's who it is. It's Mason Miller. Mason Miller is obviously my number one on my reliever wish list for controllable relievers. The closer, the right-hander from the Oakland Athletics, who will not be a free agent until after the 2029 season. By every metric available, everything out there, he's basically been the best reliever in baseball this season. Now, there's no definite reporting that he is definitely being moved by the A's. And I said earlier in the season, I didn't think he'd get traded. But as we've gotten closer to the deadline, I'm kind of more on board with, I think the A's might make this deal if they get the right price, if they get a big enough package. Look, they're a disaster franchise. They have this amazing player who could bring back a lot. Even though he's controlled for so much longer, they could just deal him. And it might take someone like Mayo or Basayo to get him. And I don't think I'm doing that for any relief pitcher. But if the Orioles are willing to give up what it takes to get Mason Miller, that's why he's number one on the list. He completely changes your bullpen, completely changes your pitching staff, your team. That's how locked down he is at the end of the games. 101 mile per hour fastball, 87 mile per hour slider. He's working on a splinter. They're all nasty. He's open to become a starter again in the future, which could help the Orioles. Like, yeah, there's a lot of injury concerns, and he had elbow problems last year, and he has given up 2 runs in 3 innings in July, and his strikeout rate's going down a little bit. But there's nobody better than Mason Miller. And if he is anything close to available, he just has to be number one on this list. And that's how it's going to be. This stuff is so nasty. Do I think the Orioles are trading for him? No. Do I think he's getting traded at all? I still think no. But there's been enough talk out there about him possibly being moved that put him on my list. And if he's going to be on the list, he's going to be number one because there is simply no one out there better than Mason Miller. I wouldn't trade as much as it's going to take to get a reliever like Miller. But maybe the Orioles do. And if they did, wow, would that change the outlook for this team. But that is my top 6 controllable reliever wish list. Let me know how I did. Different relievers you would put in there. Let me know in the comments. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel. One more quick segment to get to. We got some draft updates to finish off the pod from some of the Orioles picks and signings that is coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. Now, that is what, for one, is the key formula to winning championships, but it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. They've got superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. And with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. So with all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. And today's episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by PrizePicks. For me, the most fun and exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. How do you do it? Well, after you download the PrizePicks app, all you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. And you can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. You get out there and you watch Team USA rack up the gold this summer. You can make a PrizePicks lineup of players across basketball, soccer, tennis, golf, and more, and you can do it in as little as 60 seconds. So download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. That's code LOCKEDONMLB on PrizePicks for a deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. So to finish up today's episode, we got a couple of updates from the draft after it finished up last week. The Orioles have made another undrafted free agent signing after the MLB draft. There's 6 that they have added to the class. It is left-handed pitcher Chipper Menard out of Louisiana Monroe. Pitched 2 years at Louisiana, formerly known as Louisiana Lafayette, then transferred to Monroe for the final 2 years. In 2024, as a relief pitcher for Monroe, 4.60 ERA in 47 innings, but a really good 27% strikeout rate to an 8% walk rate and a 204 batting average against him. Baseball America had a good write-up, basically called him a smaller lefty. He's only 5'11", but his fastball 90 to 94, good slider, good curveball, and a changeup that he's working on. Just another flyer the Orioles are taking on a pitcher coming out of this draft to add to the minor leagues and see if they can develop him. He's got 1 or 2 good traits and see if they can turn him into something that pops. And then the Orioles have also signed 3 of their 21 draft picks so far. The first one they signed was Griff O'Farrell, the shortstop out of Virginia that the Orioles took with the prospect promotion incentive pick, number 32 overall. O'Farrell, who's a great contact guy, doesn't really strike out, doesn't really walk, doesn't hit for big power, but hits for crazy average, gets on base, plays a great shortstop. Signed him for $2.7 million. The slot value for that pick was $2.84 million, so they saved a little bit of money there. Orioles also signed their other pick out of Virginia, Ethan Anderson, the kind of utility catcher that they took in the second round. Great hit tool. Nobody's really sure if he'll catch or not at the next level because he didn't catch a lot in college, but the Orioles believe in him enough as a catcher to pick him that high. He signed for about $1.17 million. The slot value, $1.42 million. So again, a little below slot. And then the next guy they signed, Jack Crowder, their 9th round pick, a right-handed pitcher out of Illinois. Definitely was a senior sign to save some money, but still some solid traits from him. Signed for just $27,500, even though the slot value was $189,000. So far, the Orioles have saved over $500,000 with going under slot on these guys. They're going to use it on overslot guys. Remember, the entire draft is based on a bonus pool system. Each pick in the first 10 rounds has a slot value. If you sign a guy for less than that, you save a little money. If you sign a guy for more than that, it's overslot. You spend a little more money. In the end, you generally spend all of your bonus pool money, but there's some guys who require a little bit more of a signing bonus, some guys less. It is all a gigantic puzzle. These are just 3 pieces to that puzzle for the Orioles. But that'll do it for today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. Orioles, after the off day on Monday, they're just a week away from the trade deadline, and they are back in action on Tuesday. They're going down to South Beach to take on a struggling, and I mean struggling, Miami Marlins team. After the Marlins kind of pulled it all together and made the playoffs last year, they're not going to do that this year. Just lost 3 of 4 to the Mets. They're now 35-65 on the year. The O's should be scouting some of their relief pitchers when they are in Miami tonight. Game 1 of the series is at 6:40 p.m. The Orioles will go with Albert Suarez, the right-hander with a 2.82 ERA, making his first start after the All-Star break. And the Marlins at this point are TBD on their starter. Orioles sitting a game and a half up on the Yankees. The Yankees did play on Monday and beat the Rays 9-1. So now a game and a half lead, but they will look to extend that, playing a really struggling Marlins team in a 3-game series that starts tonight. And then I will be back tomorrow recapping game 1 between the Orioles and the Marlins, and combing through the entire NL East, not just the Marlins, but some other teams like the Nationals and maybe even the Mets who could sell off some of their pieces. I'll tell you all the guys from that division that could be available for the Orioles at the deadline coming up on tomorrow's episode. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.